Mr. Mark Keese, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here. I'm very pleased to be here and to sort of get that very rapid overview of the OSKA program. Already I feel like I don't have much to sort of teach you, because I think you're already doing a lot of the right things in terms of providing better information on future skill needs, and that's actually vitally important, and bringing together the different stakeholders. I mean, that's absolutely sort of important as well. So in fact, I'll probably go away from here taking away a lot more knowledge than I'll be able to impart to you, and perhaps go back and tell my colleagues about the wonderful example of Estonia. Basically, what I want to do is in three parts, is talk about sort of what are some of the megatrends driving the future of work, then say what do these trends actually mean in terms of changes in skill requirements, changes in work organization, and then briefly say a few words about what does this actually mean in terms of implications for education and labor market policies. Let me sort of start off by talking about the megatrends. Well, there is, of course, technological change, and in particular digitalization, which is really sort of driving quite rapid change in the labor market. This is not something new. This has actually been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, especially since the Industrial Revolution, we've had these waves of major technological sort of change, which has changed job requirements, has led to job destruction. But I think the important thing is that it's also led to a lot of job creation. But of course, new skill requirements, new ways of working. And what we're seeing unfolding here is yet another wave. But of course, there's been quite a bit of debate about, is this something new? Is this sort of a quantum leap in terms of, could this actually threaten many more jobs than in past waves of technological change? But we shouldn't forget there are also other trends that are also important that we need to sort of take into account. There's the whole sort of globalization which is occurring across all countries. So that means that Estonia is not only linked very closely to its neighbors, it's also linked to sort of more widely through global value chains to what's going on in America, what's going on in China. And what's happening in China can have a strong influence on the sorts of skill needs here, the types of jobs that are being created here. So there is the Chinese market. So Estonia has the opportunity of exporting to China, but of course we've also seen that there's been a big increase in imports from China. So that's affecting, again, the demand for the different types of jobs. There's also environmental change, which we shouldn't forget about. Again, very important also here in Estonia with a big forestry sector, is environmental change means that we have to have climate change mitigation policies. And again, we have to green our economy, and this is also changing skill requirements. Lastly, the other big sort of mega trend is we're living in sort of an aging societies. So our populations are getting rapidly older. That actually means that we have smaller cohorts coming onto the labor market every year that are bringing in those new skills. So we have to think a lot harder about how we change the skills and upgrade the skills of existing workers who are going to be working longer and perhaps changing their jobs more often. So again, putting more emphasis on transferable skills as well as learning skills more generally. So all of those megatrends mean that there will be substantial changes in what jobs will be created, how, where, and by whom they are being sort of carried out. Now, we sort of launched the OECD's activity on the future of work. We had a major forum on the 14th of January, which we had back-to-back with the OECD ministerial meeting of labor ministers. And at that forum on the 14th of January, we had a lot of internationally recognized sort of experts in the area of education and labor market policy to talk about the impact of changing skill requirements. We had representatives from the social partners, from the trade unions, from the employers. And very importantly, we actually managed to get quite a few ministers that attended the whole day of the forum on the future of work. So this is really becoming a sort of burning issue. We were very fortunate we had a very interesting debate And I thought it was good to see this sort of cross-Atlantic sort of debate between Tom Perez, the Secretary of Labor of the United States, and Andrea Nahles, the Minister of Employment and Social Affairs in Germany. And they had a very interesting debate, and it was good to see the sort of the contrast, but also a lot of the similarities in the sort of the issues that they are both sort of dealing with in their different countries. Let me just show you then a video where we can actually sort of see what were some of the sort of views of some of these experts and some of these ministers in terms of how they see some of these megatrends impacting upon the future of work.
We're in the early stages of a major technological revolution. Computers, software, big data are vastly expanding the set of things that machines can do today. Machines are just beginning to learn how to pick up on subtler social cues and how to learn how to do tasks on their own. And as the machines get better at that, there'll be a broader set of jobs that are affected.
It's possible that at some point in the distant future, machines could replace human labor, but that period is very far away. And in the meantime, machines complement human labor in all kinds of ways. They make us more productive, they make us safer, they allow us to do more interesting and varied jobs.
Before we look at the future of work and the elements of digitization, it's important to look back at the past of work.
The first wave of jobs that were especially affected were routine information processing jobs, where we can define clearly the steps of the tasks that need to be done. You can take those steps, you can codify them, and then you can digitize them. And once you digitize them, you can make a copy or 10 copies or 100 million copies.
That process automation tends to reduce the demand for many of these middle skill jobs, clerical jobs. What remains behind? Well, on the one hand, you have professional, technical, and managerial jobs. And on the other hand, you have many jobs that are also growing that are not highly educated or highly paid. And these are food service, cleaning, security.
Some of the new jobs that will be created are in areas of social interaction, nurturing, caring, persuading people, sales, coaching. These are all jobs that rely on interpersonal interactions that machines so far are pretty bad at.
Many of them are creative jobs, so jobs in research, jobs in entertainment, jobs that require physical dexterity, like being an electrician or a plumber or a construction worker. So there's a broad set of activities that I think are hard to automate and will become more, not less important.
We're going to find out many things about sharing with others. Do you know why we share? Let's find out.
Soy una gran usuaria de la sharing economy. Uso mucho
I think the sharing economy might be a good thing, but only if there's a shift in what is considered common grounds and what is
De plus en plus, on a une source de revenus première et puis on a éventuellement des revenus d'appoint. Comme on l'était dans
el Estado va a tener que pensar cómo toda la net de seguridad social se adapta a esta nueva realidad.
Digitization presents opportunities for people to monetize their assets, to turn your car or your apartment into a source of income. At the same time, it presents some challenges in terms of how we define workplace relationships. So what happens if you are driving a car for profit and you get into an accident? Are you someone who's entitled to protection, or are you on your own?
We traditionally measure things like how many jobs have been created, when we really now have to go to a much more detailed analysis of the quality of the jobs, the quality of the workplace, the security that you have.
Ich sehe für den Staat die zentrale Aufgabe darin, den Rahmen zu schaffen und die richtigen Anreize dafür zu setzen, dass Unternehmen, Beschäftigte und Sozialpartner gemeinsam den Wandel der Arbeit gestalten können. Indem wir die Weiterbildung gezielt fördern und eine neue Weiterbildungskultur schaffen, können wir alle Beschäftigten auch ertüchtigen, sich in der digitalisierten Arbeitswelt zu bewähren.
We are in the post-crisis, but still with more unemployed than before the crisis. So this is what the meeting is going to be about. getting our heads together, getting our skills together, our knowledge together, and finding the best practices. This is what the OECD is about. Better policies for better lives. In this particular case, better labor policies for better lives.
So, actually, that was one of the things that I learned. The last thing that I learned was actually how to embed a video into my PowerPoint presentation. Took me a while, actually, probably longer than the rest of my presentation altogether, but hopefully the next time I'll be a bit faster. So, I think there's some key points that came out of that. And the first one, of course, is that with digitalization in particular, we are going to actually see changes in in the types of jobs that we need, and in particular in the types of skills that we need. So if we look at this chart here, it actually looks at what has been the job growth over the last sort of 10 to 15 years in terms of whether these jobs involve abstract sort of reasoning skills and high skills, whether they involve rather routine sort of middle-level skills, or whether they involve non-routine sort of manual skills. And basically we see that there's this polarization. So we see that across sort of most countries, and if we take the average for all countries, we see that in general that basically job growth has been fastest in those jobs that require sort of these abstract sort of cognitive non-routine skills. It's been lowest, in fact there's been large declines in sort of the routine skills. So a lot of the old sort of clerical sort of jobs that involved cognitive functions, but nevertheless sort of quite routine sort of skills have declined massively. And there's been some smaller growth in these non-routine manual sort of jobs. These are sort of caring jobs, for example, personal service type jobs. But this is what's been called sort of a polarization in skill demands. We can see that in a little bit more detail when and a longer term trend when we look at the data for the US, where we can go back much further, and some researchers have tried to break this down in further sort of detail. And we can see that there's been this tremendous decline in demand for sort of jobs that require sort of either manual skills or in particular sort of routine cognitive skills. And that has sort of been going on since about sort of the 1980s. So again, this is not something that's happening in the last 10 years, but it's been happening for the last 30 to sort of 40 years. Where there's been the biggest growth has been in the non-routine interpersonal skills, and also in the sort of non-routine analytical skills. So again, it's skills like sort of analytical reasoning, problem solving, critical thinking, creative skills, but also good communication skills. These are the skills that are sort of have been increasing rapidly for a long time. And there's just been this hollowing out in those middle level skills. And as a consequence, this is actually driving sort of a lot of inequality more generally. It's driving sort of an increase in earnings inequality, and that's feeding through to an increase in income inequality. Because a lot of those mid-level skills, those middle-class skills that provided good, solid middle-class incomes, are basically the demand is falling away for those skills. That's forcing people with, say, mid-level skills, of course, to sort of compete with people with low-level skills where there has been some increase in demand, and that's driving down their wages despite that increase in demand for those skills. Whereas, of course, if you happen to be the privileged few that do have those good cognitive analytical skills or interpersonal skills, you've seen your wage go up quite rapidly. So it's driving sort of a wedge into the sort of wage distribution and therefore into the income distribution. The other sort of element is not just are we sort of seeing sort of this change in job demands, but as I said before, is there actually a quantum change? Will we actually see mass sort of technological unemployment as a result of automation and digitalization? So will we actually see more jobs disappearing than will be created? Well, if we actually look at the picture of the long sort of term trends, we see that in fact in many countries, and particularly sort of the large OECD countries, employment population ratios have reached their highest level ever. So if you were thinking that digitalization was going to lead to mass unemployment, you would think that, that employment population ratios would actually be declining. But in fact, for many economies, they've been increasing. Of course, you have got some differences like Estonia, but that reflects sort of national sort of features. There's been a major transformation in Estonia, as you well know, as in the Russian Federation, where you had exceptionally high employment rates formerly, and there's been some decline, but it's since sort of stabilized after the transformation. So that evidence suggests that perhaps those trends point in the direction that we won't see mass sort of unemployment. The other thing that we can do is look more carefully at sort of job tasks and look at the jobs that are around now and which jobs are at risk of disappearing because of automation. Now, there's been very sort of alarming statistics that in the US, 47% of all current jobs may disappear in the next 10 to 15 years because they involve sort of tasks that can be easily sort of digitalized and automated. But in fact, we sort of commissioned a study that used our survey of adult skills to look at individuals' tasks that they're performing and came up with much lower numbers. So in the case of Estonia, we came up with the fact that 6% of jobs, current jobs, may be at risk of disappearing in the near future. And on average, roughly about sort of 8% across sort of the OECD countries that are represented. So much lower numbers. But nevertheless, I think the story here is that yes, some jobs will disappear. There may not be mass unemployment, but the content of existing jobs is going to change a lot. The skill requirements are going to change a lot, and our education and training systems have to ensure that people start off in the labor market with the right skills, and also, secondly, have opportunities to upgrade and learn new skills as they go through their working lives. I think the other major change, apart from changes in skill requirements, is just the changes in work organization. So you've had the sort of emergence of the platform or sharing economy. So you've had the emergence of companies like Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, Mechanical Turk, that all use the internet as a platform for organizing new forms of work. Now, the advantage of this is that on the one hand, it can give greater income and flexibility to workers. So many workers in France, for example, or in the US that are working as Uber drivers, they're actually doing that as a second job. It gives them the opportunity to increase their income. They have flexibility in terms of the hours of their work. And it can also lead to greater efficiency. Uber tariffs, for example, are cheaper than sort of normal taxi tariffs. So there can be some efficiency gains. That's the positive side of the emergence of the new sort of platform, sharing platform. The downside, of course, is that there is a risk of greater sort of precarity. So these people working in the platform economy have sort of less social protection. It's not clear sort of if they lose their job, can they get unemployment benefits? They may not have protection. They might not have be sort of having contributions to a pension system. So when they get older, will they have a decent pension or not? So again, there are issues there that need to be weighed against that flexibility. And I think the trick for policy is to get that balance right. We don't want to kill the sort of the goose that lays the golden egg, but nevertheless, we have to sort of ensure that there is greater protection for people involved in the platform economy. So I think the future of work requires a change to how we think about skills. Basically, there will be new skills, new occupations and tasks that education and training systems have to sort of cater for. So this requires, of course, strengthening people's ICT skills, and I think that's everybody's IT skills because that is going to become the pervasive technology in everybody's jobs. There has to be a stronger sort of emphasis on problem-solving skills and socio-emotional skills. Then, as I mentioned, there will be these new forms of employment. So I think we have to also put emphasis on decision-making skills. So a lot more responsibility will be put on individual workers in terms of their social protection, in terms of the training that they take up that won't be supplied by that one company that's employing them throughout their life. They have to make those decisions themselves. And lastly, as I mentioned, because people will be changing their careers more often than in the past, we need to sort of, again, strengthen lifelong learning. This has remained a rhetoric for many countries that, yes, we need more lifelong learning, but in practice, this hasn't happened. And of course, there needs to be greater skills recognition. A lot of the skills that people learn are not formal skills, they are not formal qualifications, but they need to be recognized so that they can be transferred to new jobs. Now, this is rather a sobering graphic because it tells you, are people prepared for the new economy and for the new skills? We carried out this survey of adult skills in about 21 countries, and we have another 9 countries that have joined in the second wave of the survey. And here we sort of could actually test people's problem-solving skills in a technologically rich environment. That meant that we gave them sort of simulated to sort of internet pages, and they had to find relevant information to answer certain questions. And unfortunately, what we saw that across all countries, we have about sort of 50% of the workforce, the adult workforce, that does not have very good problem-solving skills involving sort of technology. So very poor problem-solving skills. And we see that in Estonia, that is 56%, so much lower than in Sweden. On the other side, in terms of having good problem-solving skills, again, we see, unfortunately, Estonia has quite low numbers there, especially compared to sort of Sweden. I think altogether, people that had sort of quite good problem-solving skills was only about 24% of the population. In Sweden, you get up to about 40% of the adult population has these good problem-solving skills. So again, a lot of effort is required there to improve that. The other issue, of course, and was mentioned earlier on, is about skills mismatch. Now, depending on actually how you measure skills mismatch, it can be very large numbers or very small numbers. Employers actually do quite a good job that even if somebody is sort of overqualified in terms of having a university degree for a job that doesn't need a university degree, employers, they gradually work out what are the skills people have. Because you may have a university degree, but for a special job, even if you don't need that university degree, you may need some sort of management skills or different skill sets that may have little to do with your formal qualifications. Employers gradually work that out. So you see that young people can be have high problems of skills mismatch, but as they settle into the job, employers work out how can we fit this job to their skills, and how do we get rid of people that don't have the right skills for the jobs we have. And so, in fact, across OECD countries, overskilling people that have too many skills for the job that they're doing is roughly about sort of 10%. And people that are sort of underskilled, they don't have enough skills for the job that they're doing, is much lower, around about sort of less than 5%. And we see that skills mismatch in Estonia in general is sort of lower than in many other countries. However, that's not the case when we look at qualifications mismatch. Here we see that in the case of Estonia, you have much larger percentages of people that, for example, studied in one field but are actually working in another job that doesn't require qualifications in that field. So there is a field of what we call a mismatch by field of study. And we see that this is particularly a problem with people that have agricultural degrees, that more than 70% of them are working somewhere else in another job that doesn't require these degrees. So perhaps this represents perhaps the older population that may have done degrees in forestry and are no longer working in that sector or working in another sector. We see that, of course, if you're in health and welfare, got a degree in health and welfare, you tend to be working in a job that needs those qualifications. So again, there's a story of quite a large mismatch in terms of qualifications. And in Estonia, let me go back. In Estonia, we see that this actually leads to a large penalty. So if you're either overqualified in your job, or you're in a sort of working in a job that doesn't require the qualification that you studied in, you end up earning 40% sort of less than somebody else who is well matched in their job. So again, there are penalties to these forms of mismatch. The other issue, of course, is, as I said, lifelong learning is absolutely important. We need to sort of be able to update regularly our sort of skills. And we see, unfortunately, that those people that perhaps are in greatest need of training, that have the least education, actually tend to get the smallest amount of training. So that we see in Estonia, for example, we have something like 14% of people with low levels of literacy. So here we're measuring education in terms of people's proficiency in literacy, so how well they understand text, can extract information. So if they have a low level of literacy, they actually don't participate much in training. So this is whether you participated in training in the last 12 months. However, those people with high levels of literacy sort of get the most training, and we see the same pattern across all countries. In terms of overall levels of training, we see that Estonia is roughly sort of somewhere in the middle. So it doesn't give as much training as in other countries like the US or Canada or Australia, but it gives more training on average than in some of the southern European countries. But again, how can we narrow those differences across proficiency levels? I think the trick is here, quite frankly, is you have to start off early. So we shouldn't be seeing many people here with low levels of literacy in the first place. They should not be leaving the education system with those low levels of literacy. So a key challenge. So what is the sort of overall sort of important policy message here is there needs to be better information and anticipation of changing skill needs. And that's why I think the OSKA program is sort of an excellent example of this. You need to improve your labor market information that relies on sort of skill foresight type of exercises, which is embedded in OSKA. And you also need better information on outcomes of skills. So that's the other thing. Not just on what skills are needed, but what are the outcomes of these skills in terms of the probability of getting a job, but also in terms of the probability of staying in that job and the earnings that will be associated with that job. There needs to be greater responsiveness, and I think that's the other side. So you can have very good foresight exercises, you work out what skills are needed, but if that doesn't then feed back into the education and training system in terms of the types of courses that you design and the substance of those courses, or into people's investment decisions, so young people deciding which university course they want to do or which vocational education and training course, then you're falling down. You're not using well that information. So you need to have greater responsiveness. And lastly, and again, it's pleasing to see that this is occurring in OSKA, is you need to involve all key stakeholders. So your education and training ministries, of course, but also your other ministries, so your employment ministries, your social affairs ministries, and your finance ministries. And of course, the key sort of people are your employers and, of course, your trade unions. They are the closest to the ground in terms of knowing what skills are needed. Basically, we did a survey of all countries in terms of how well they go about sort of anticipating changing skill needs and how well they coordinate that across the different actors and then how responsive their systems are. Estonia did very well in terms of providing quantitative analysis. I'm glad to see that in OSKA, it's also where we saw there was a bit of a shortfall was the need to improve that with qualitative information. And I think that's what I saw in those reports, what I could understand from my limited Estonian. And we also saw that there was a need for greater sectoral detail. And again, I was pleased to see that you do have these sectoral reports. Again, there also seemed to us, based on the replies to this survey we did of countries, very good coordination across ministries, but perhaps you need to strengthen coordination at the subnational level. And I would be interested to talk to you afterwards to see to what extent that is happening. And then here is just some information about, of course, this sort of coordination across countries happens in different ways in different countries. Just very quickly, just to say that there is a need to actually align skill needs and perceived skill needs across a sort of different stakeholders. And I think what's interesting here is to see that if you asked, there was a McKinsey survey across European countries, if you asked education providers, are young people prepared for the labour market? Are your graduates prepared for the labour market? 74% of respondents said yes. However, if you asked employers, only 35% said that their recent hires of young people, that they had the right skills for the job. So again, there is this different perception, and you have to align that better. So bringing the worlds of education and work together. And so my last slide is that basically we need to have a much better integrated system of skill needs information. This can actually sort of help inform education policy in terms of course development, help students in terms of what courses they're going to undertake. Very important that this informs employment policy, to update occupational standards, to use it for the Public Employment Service in terms of providing information on what jobs are available, in terms of for active labour market policies, in terms of what training should be given, and also to develop apprenticeship programs. Migration policy is also important. So this can help guide sort of which migrants are you going to allow to come in, improve the sort of the targeting of migrants with the skills that you need in your labour market. And lastly, it's important for the social partners in terms of advising members on skills to promote and to influence labour and education policy. I should have put, of course, at the middle the finance ministry, because they are the ones financing many of these policies, and so they need to be involved as well. But again, it's getting that integration to improve people's skills for better lives. Thank you very much.